Hello, my name is Anne Marie Cannon, and I'm the host of Armchair Historians. What's your favorite history? Each episode begins with this one question. Our guests come from all walks of life. YouTube celebrities, comedians, historians, even neighbors from the small mountain community that I live in. They're people who love history and get really excited about a particular time, place, or person from our distant or not so distant past. The jumping off point is the place where they became curious, then entered the rabbit hole into discovery. Fueled by an unrelenting need to know more, we look at history through the filter of other people's eyes. Armchair Historians is a Belgian Rabbit production. Stay up to date with us through Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Wherever you listen to your podcast, that is where you'll find us. Armchair Historians is an independent, commercial-free podcast. If you'd like to support the show and keep it ad-free, you can buy us a cup of coffee through Ko-fi, or you can become a patron through Patreon. Links to both in the episode notes. Hello, fellow armchair historians. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'd like to start out by thanking new Ko-fi supporters, Allison and Lauren. Thank you for your support. It means the world to us. In this episode, the second in our Mudlark series, I talked to Mudlarker Lynn Pew. Lynn mudlarks along the River Irwell in Lancashire, England, where she scours the banks for beautiful pieces of broken pottery, little pieces of history, tumbled by the river for over 100 years. Lynn tells us about the history of the river and where many of the pieces she finds originated. Be sure to check out Lynn's Instagram page to see some of her amazing finds and works of art. The link will be available in the episode notes. Lynn Pew, welcome to Armchair Historians. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, I'm so excited. So, what is your favorite history that we're going to be talking about today?
Well, this is really hard to pin down because ever since I was a little girl, as long as I can remember, I've just been obsessed with old things. And I suppose when I was little, I wouldn't have known what specific period. As long as they had a history, they'd been used, they'd been loved, they'd been part of somebody else's life, I was just obsessed with them. I'm a child of the 70s, and that period was really not one for kind of celebrating old things, the, traditional features. We were busy ripping out fireplaces and coving and ceiling roses. And I think we lived in a 1930s house, but there were no features left in it. Everything had been modernized to within an inch of its life. But even then, I knew that really didn't sit well with me. So I would love to go to my grandparents' house where they had old furniture. I had a mad old aunt who was so eccentric, but she'd been a model in the 30s. So she had old clothes. Yeah, she'd been a hairdressing model, and she had the most amazing photographs and fur stoles and beautiful clothes that she'd worn, and I was obsessed. And she had a cellar, and I remember the cellar had an old mangle in it, and I just used to love to play in there. And my friend and I were obsessed with Little House on the Prairie, and we would play that in her garage, and she had little tin plates, and we'd just pretend, but so even it's really hard to pin down a period, but I think with regards to what I do now, where I live and what I do, it would have to be Victorian. So we live in a Victorian town that was kind of built during the Industrial Revolution, and I live in a Victorian house. Most of the things that I'm passionate about, the art that I love, the Pre-Raphaelites, Thomas Hardy, Dickens, the Brontes. So I think it's all Victorian, really.
Oh, wow. Kindred spirits. I have a similar story, but I didn't have an eccentric aunt. I had my mom had a trunk upstairs in the, I know. She had a trunk up in the attic, and I just remember I would go up there. I'd steal away up in the attic, and I would open the trunk, and there were these beautiful dresses from the 1950s. My mother was gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I remember this pair of red patent leather shoes that were stiletto heels, and I would just hold them and touch them and think
yeah,
about
yeah.
them. And then she had these little Avon, I don't know, little lipsticks, the sample ones, and she had this like candy apple red.
Oh,
I get it. We're kindred
yeah,
spirits when it comes
yeah,
to
yeah.
things in history. It seems like people are born into it or not.
And my parents, I mean, I used to love listening to their stories from their childhood. My father was born in Scotland, and he lived in an old tenement building, and there were three of them, and he slept in a hole in the wall, and it was, he used to say first up, best dressed. And my grandfather, he was a gunner during the Second World War, and he was stationed, I think, the White Cliffs of Dover. He was left for dead, but
Wow.
rescued by an American soldier. And I just used to love the stories. But my parents were very modern. They always wanted the newest thing. And like I say, our house, everything had been any kind of feature had been removed. And, the doors had been replaced with mottled glass doors, and we had gas fires. And, I think we had a pink bathroom suite. I can't remember entirely, but, it was modern. And I just knew even then, just didn't sit well with me. I felt like I'd been born,
Mm.
in the wrong era, really. But yeah,
Mm-hmm. So what is it about the Victorian era that resonates with you?
I don't know really. Just that I think we romanticize it, even though, it was probably hell to live through, especially. And I
Yeah.
was always obsessed with, I think it was Edwardian, but there was a program when I was a little girl called Upstairs, Downstairs. And it
Okay, I've heard
featured
of it.
a period house, and it was the landed gentry upstairs and their servants downstairs. But I was obsessed with the downstairs and the kitchen and the kitchen alien and the scullery maids. I was just obsessed with that. But yeah, it was always the kind of everyday things. We did obviously about kings and queens at school, but I was just interested in the everyday, how people lived and what they
Mm.
used and what they wore and what they ate. Just, the kind of mundane things, but that were fascinating to me. But we live now in, like I say, a Victorian town, and it's a valley. So there's no way out but up really steep hills. And, there's one hill in particular. It's got a rail kind of embedded into the wall because, and I just imagine them in their long gowns and their boots trying to walk up those hills back in the day. I don't know how,
Yeah.
like I say, it must have been a hard life, but I think we romanticize it.
Yeah, I think so too. But it's fascinating the way that they lived and
Yeah.
the clothes they wore. And I, like you, am fascinated with the everyday mundane, the stories that we don't really hear about in the history
Yeah.
books. And that's how this podcast was born. But more recently, I've gotten into mudlarking, which is how I
Right.
found you on Instagram
Yeah.
through your beautiful
Yeah.
artwork, which I did a
Oh, thank
post
you.
on social media today. So everybody should look at it and savor it. And what I love obviously, about your art is that you incorporate your mudlarking finds into it. So why don't you tell us about that and how you got into mudlarking?
Okay. So I have been mudlarking for a long time before I started making, but I'd also been mudlarking for a long time before I even knew what it was. So we moved to Ramsbottom, and I had my son 2001. So it was when he was little that we started going down to the river, and I had noticed these little pieces scattered amongst the banks. I had no idea what they were. And this was before we had a computer at home. So had no way of Googling it. I didn't know what they were. And
It
I'd
didn't
ask people and
exist.
yeah. So, and then when he was little, we then started collecting them, and we put them in a jar, and the jar got bigger. And the jar became a box, and the box got fuller, and it just get, it kind of evolved. I mean, my workroom now, it's packed and everything's, color coordinated. But back then it was just in a bottle. And I used to say, I'll do something with it one day. And then I had my daughter, and she loved doing it as well. And it wasn't until I found the article the other day, because when I knew I was going to speak to you, I was trying to remember the timeline. So it was 2013. So we'd been collecting for quite a while. And in a magazine that I subscribe to, which is called Country Living, there was a feature and it was called Country in the City. And it was about mudlarking on the Thames. And I read it and it was like a eureka moment. It was like, well, that's what I do. Obviously, I don't do it on the Thames. I do it on the Irwell, but that's what I do. And other people do it and I'm not mad. And it's a thing.
Not at all. So you don't mudlark on the Thames, and I assumed for whatever reason that you did. So why don't you tell us about where you're at in the river that you generally mudlark on?
Okay, so we live in a town called Ramsbottom. Now, it's nothing to do with the back end of a sheep. It's to do with the fact that we live in a valley and Ramson's garlic grows in the valley. So it's the Ramson's garlic and the valley bottom put it together. So that's how the town was named. Now, I think before the Industrial Revolution it was, there were maybe some farmsteads, but nothing huge. It was quite rural. And then obviously the town kind of flourished during the Industrial Revolution and grew. And we're kind of founded on the cotton mills and textile industry, and it boomed. So the River Irwell runs through Ramsbottom. It starts in the hills not too far from where we are and then flows through quite a few little northern towns, and I think it joins the Manchester Ship Canal and then the River Mersey. Forgive me if I've got that slightly wrong. And then out to the Irish Sea, I think. So apparently there was a family of tenant farmers called the Grant brothers. And they'd had a few bad seasons, a few failed crops, and they'd heard about the flourishing textile industry in Lancashire. So they decided, they were rock bottom. They decided to make, I think it was 300 miles. I'm not sure, a long trek from Scotland to Lancashire with 8 children. And God knows how long it took them. And supposedly they stood looking down into the valley and they saw the River Irwell running through, and it reminded them of where they'd come from. And they said, that's where we're going to make our home. So they joined some mills and kind of worked their way up. They opened a little shop in the centre of the town and just worked their way up, and then bought mills, employed a lot of people. They were supposed to be very philanthropic, kind employers, which was maybe not how most employers were. Supposedly, when they'd made their fortune, they met Charles Dickens in Manchester. So we're only about 25 minutes from Manchester. They met Dickens in Manchester.
Wow.
And then he wrote, Nicholas Nickleby, and there was a pair of twins called the Cheeryble brothers. Uh-huh. And it said that they were based on the Grant brothers. So they were kind of immortalized in English literature history then. So, so the park that I mudlark in, where the River Irwell runs through, they built a stately home there. I think there had been something previously, but I think they rebuilt it, Nuttall Hall. So I mudlark on the river, mainly there. And so I presume most of the finds that I find are the remnants of their life and their employers' lives. There were cottages where staff lived. They're still there, but the hall was demolished in the 50s, I think. So, it's just really lovely to think these little pieces you find. Was it from them? It's just wonderful to think of the line of the history of something you pick up that maybe hasn't been handled for all those years. And then to kind of make it into something else. That's what I get my kick from. So, I think lots of people mudlark and keep the finds, but to kind of then make it into something else, so it's living again.
Yeah, well, and what I love about your pieces are you don't use a lot of pieces in each work of art, so it really causes you to focus on the specific. And it seems like you use pottery and china and that type of thing that you incorporate into your artwork. And I
Yeah.
love that because you really focus on that one little piece.
On those little pieces, and they're all so different. They become something in the water that you can't make that. You can't make those rounded edges and the crackling and the, the watermarks. You can't, you can't get them anywhere else. You've got to pluck them out of the river. And it's
like
the
you're
effects,
partnering with nature as an artist.
Yeah, kind of time and tide. Although the Irwell isn't tidal, but they've been in that river for so long.
So it's not a tidal river.
No, it's not a tidal river. No. I know the Thames is, but the Irwell isn't.
You're dependent on like dry seasons for new
Dry
things to be
season. Yeah, I
uncovered?
mean, sometimes I'll go down. We get a lot of rain here, as you can imagine. And sometimes I'll go down, you can't get anywhere near it. And then other times you go down and it's, the river's really far out. It's quite rocky. I know the Thames they get a lot of that mud that preserves things. Whereas the Irwell, the little beaches that I kind of go to are quite rocky. So I don't know if I'd ever find the things I find similar things, but I don't think I'd ever find an intact pipe bowl because I just think they'd be smashed to pieces before I find them.
Interesting.
So
okay.
Larger pieces are quite hard to find. You get it's all broken up, but smoothed and beautiful. But yeah, I think different in that way.
I like that about the pottery, is like those rounded edges and that type of thing. So one of the questions I ask, which you kind of already answered, is where do we see this history in pop culture? And, part of the history you talked about was the founders of, well, not the founders, but, the business people who put your town on the map and how they were incorporated into Dickens' story. Where else do we see this history in pop culture?
We're so into recycling now. It's the ultimate recycling, isn't it? To be plucking something from those ages out of the river, any river, and making it into something else. It's the ultimate recycling, really. It's waste disposal, but it just seems so much more glamorous. And to be making something from something you're really just clearing away. You obviously know the pipe bowls. That day's cigarette butt, really, but so much more glamorous. But to kind of
so much
take
more
those
glamorous.
and so much more glamorous.
I always think about the future and the things that we discard and what it's going to be like for people if we have a future who find these things and what they're going to think about these things. The way that we look at pipe bowls and, we're so amazed by them. I always wonder what our things are going to look like in the future to other people.
I know. And I mean, I can't imagine what somebody would think of what I do now, thinking that they, something that they broke so many years ago is now, kind of sought after in a completely different form. I hope they like it.
Right. I'm sure they will. So tell me, what is your favorite find?
I love finding children's toys because that was another thing I was obsessed with when I was little. And I remember seeing, I think it was on Blue Peter, which was a kids program years ago. I think it's Queen Anne's doll's house. I think it was from the 20s. And it's the most amazing thing you've ever seen. Have you heard about it? I think it's on show at Windsor Castle. You need to have a look. It's amazing. And it's open to the public. So I was always obsessed with dolls' houses. I never had one. So when I find little pieces of doll's house china or little tea sets, I just love it, knowing that the kids have played with it. I find a lot of, they're called different names, 5 stones or alley gobs. They look like little dice, but they're ridged and they're usually blues or browns. And they would play with them like jacks. Are you familiar with jacks, where you throw the ball and you catch the little things on your hand? So it was like the equivalent then. And you find quite a lot of those. Frozen Charlotte dolls, I love finding. Are you familiar with those?
Yes.
So they're little tiny dolls that they, I think they were German in origin, and their limbs don't move. I think they were originally made to be played with in the bath. So they were glazed on one side, not the other, so that they would float. But they were sold for like a penny, and they would sometimes they would hide them in Christmas puddings, or they would use them in dolls' houses. So finding those is fab. So children's toys are my favourite things.
So most of what you find is Victorian. What's the oldest thing you've ever found?
I'm not sure. I think 90% of it is Victorian. Yeah, because like I say, I think before the Industrial Revolution, there were probably farms here, there and everywhere, but maybe not running right along the river. And I think most of what I find is Victorian. Nothing of major age, but just, fascinating to me, really.
Yeah, I love it. We just got back from the UK, so we traveled up into Edinburgh and we went to York, and then not quite 3 years ago, we were planning a trip to the UK, and I got my Mudlarks license because I was obsessed with it. I live in Colorado.
Right.
And I started watching, like Nicola White YouTube videos and Sci-Finds, who I just interviewed, and became obsessed. But then I had to cancel my trip because of the pandemic.
Okay.
And luckily, when we planned this new trip, my Mudlark license was still good. Do you need a Mudlark license, or can you just go and pick up things from the river? I think you can just go.
I mean, I remember when I very first started, and I did panic a bit thinking, do I need a license? I think I asked Nicola, actually. I think I reached out to her and asked her, but no, I think because the Irwell doesn't, it's not the same as the Thames where it flows along. Yeah. Great historical, important buildings where there could be something of great value. Right. No, I don't think so. Not that I know, anyway.
Yeah. Obviously, you've been doing it for years, and it's kind of like here with metal detecting. Unless it's distinctively been determined that you can't metal detect in a particular area, a lot of times it hasn't even been discussed in public places. So you just kind of hope for the best, or if the owner of the property, that type of thing. Yeah. And nobody's ever said anything to you. And I guess that's what it is. The Mudlark license is just for the River Thames. And so I did get to Mudlark 5 times while I was there, which was amazing. And the history, like you said, it extends so far back, and it runs along so many important historical areas. And then you have, like you were talking about, the anaerobic clay and how things get preserved, and you can find some amazing finds there. And like
what did you find?
Oh, I was hoping you'd ask. I did find 2 intact pipes, and I found one that was beaten up, but it was one of the early ones because it was one of the tiny little pipe bowls.
Yeah.
So probably from the 1600s. Okay. And I found a piece of chainmail.
Okay.
So that was pretty cool.
Wow.
In the shards of pottery, 3 of them were little tiny ones, like what you incorporate. They were the Tudor green.
Okay.
So that was pretty cool. And then, other things that I'm not quite sure what time period they're from. I have one piece that might be Roman, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure. I've got lots of pottery. I don't know. Some of it may be Roman. I have no idea. But if it's beautiful to me and I can use it, that's all I need to know, really.
Yeah. Well, that, is cool. And I was really excited because you mudlark in a completely different place than what I know about. And I guess mudlarking was coined maybe in the 1800s.
And I think it was specifically aimed at the Thames. I think that's where the phrase originated, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And Simon talked about that in the interview I just did with him. He talked kind of about the basics of mudlarking, but I hear people, use the term mudlarking in different places now, even in the United States.
Well, I think anywhere where there's a river, or, I know obviously there's field walking, you can find things there. In ploughed fields, obviously metal detecting. I've never done that. I'd love to do that.
It's fun. I started metal detecting because During the pandemic, I have a great nephew who, I don't know if you listened to the last
I did.
that was my nephew. I love him.
He's
so
so
sweet. And he's
cute.
so into treasure
Into
hunting.
it, yeah.
Yeah, he is. So him and his mom, who is my niece, they had an old metal detector, and you had to find new things to do when during the pandemic.
But
They
yeah,
went out with the old metal detector, and that's how I started, kind of metal detecting, because it filled that void of not being able to mudlark on the Thames, which I had been
yes.
planning for. So we don't have well, I shouldn't say that, because the indigenous history stretches back to when people came over the Bering Strait up there. But a lot of the things I find are from the 1800s.
Yes.
And I do that. I collect a lot of glass because I find broken pieces of glass all over the place here.
Yeah.
And I live in a National Historic Landmark District. It made me feel better, because I think when you said, one of these days I'm going to do something with this stuff. And so I've kind of been telling myself that, and I've got all kinds of pieces of old glass everywhere in the house. And my boyfriend keeps looking at me and scratching his head. What are you doing with that stuff?
I know.
But I do plan on doing something with it one day, and it looks pretty.
Yeah. And I mean, it took me years. Like I say, I think I started collecting about Gabriel was born in 2001. He was probably about 3 before we started bringing stuff back. And then I didn't do anything with it till 10 years later. So, your time will come.
It'll come. Or my daughter will have to clean the place out and say, Mom, why did you do this?
Oh.
She's 37, so. Do you have something that you'd like to find that you haven't found yet?
Yes, I would love to find an intact pipe bowl with a long stem. I just think it's never going to happen. But not on the Irwell. I would love to find a Bartnum jug. Is it a Bartnum, a Bellarmine jug? Have you heard
with
of
the
that?
face on
with
it.
the face. Yeah. I mean, I have some bits that look like the same sort of pottery, but there's, I don't know if they are or if they're not, but yeah, just a bit of that face I would love. I don't get any of that lovely pottery that's like, we have a dessert in England called a Bakewell tart, and it has icing on the top that's been kind of, I don't even know how you'd say it, but the ice is kind of manipulated to make these lovely lines, and there's a pottery that looks just like that. Do you know the one I mean?
It's kind of like almost like a yellow and brown.
Yes.
I got a piece of that, and I can't remember the name of it. I got a piece of that from the Thames.
Okay. I've never found anything like that. Like I say, I think 90% of my stuff is Victorian kitchenware. You know what I do get a lot of, and I didn't know, wasn't aware that's what I was picking up. I get a lot of this like rim, and I thought it was the rim of like a pie dish. So it's kind of circular. You can see down the length of it if you look, and it's been decorated always the same, like little blue leaves, but obviously many different people have painted the same design. So I think I put a call out on Instagram to say, what is this? And it came back that it was the rim of a chamber pot.
Okay.
Probably very different contents, and hopefully whenever they were dropped, they weren't full. But I suppose you can imagine they would have been carried up and down stairs and emptied and carried back up again. But yeah, apparently they're a chamber pot. I get a lot of that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I wonder that too. I find a lot of white. We're a National Historic Landmark District. We have in our town of 1,000 over 240 buildings that are from the 1800s that are protected. But I look along just my walks in the dirt, and I find little pieces of like some kind of white pottery. I always think that those were the chamber pots. I don't know if that's true or not, but
well, even the chamber pots were decorated. It was just decorate everything. Yeah. So yeah, I don't usually pick up white. There is somebody I follow on Instagram who does the most amazing, huge, big circles. I can't think what his name is. And they're like a massive circle halved, and the top half will be all the whites and neutrals, and then the bottom half will be a colour, and they're huge. They're
Oh, wow.
gorgeous. But I don't usually use the whites. But it's
I don't
interesting
pick
that,
up the whites. It's funny because usually what I pick up is the glass. I don't get a lot of decorated pottery. If I find
right,
something with any
okay.
kind of decoration on it, I'll pick it up. But it's usually the glass that I pick up. I don't know
Okay.
why. And I look at the white and I think, well, that could be something. I must like know that what I'm going to do, but I don't know that I know.
But you don't know yet, yeah, yeah. See,
Yeah.
I just know that they wouldn't be useful to me, so I'll leave them for somebody else. But yeah.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about today?
No, I think we kind of covered it all. I mean, there's still hope because I didn't do anything with my pieces for a long, long time, and it was also in Country Living magazine where they had a competition called Kitchen Table Talent, and it was a call out to kind of new makers, and you could win a table at their spring fair, which is a huge event. They hold it at the Business Design Centre in Islington, and that's when I thought, right, I need to do something. I'm going to do something, and originally I made initials. It just seemed the thing that just came to mind first. So I made the whole alphabet, and I won a place. I had to send it all into Country Living. I won a place and took it to the Business Design Centre, and that's how it kind of all started, really. It was really well received.
So
And
where
just
can we find you? That was the next thing I was wanted to talk about is where can we find you? What do you do? I know you do
so,
the insects and you do the letters, which are amazing.
yeah.
So why don't you
And
tell us
I
about
do
that?
little angels as well. I do initials, I do words, I do bees, butterflies, dragonflies, hearts, angels, and they all kind of incorporate something else. So the angels have old watch faces that I gold leaf as the halos. The dragonflies and butterflies have old postcards that I try to get them a similar age. They're,
Oh,
Victorian,
so
Edwardian.
the base of those are postcards.
Yes, yes. I try and incorporate something else that's of an age into them as well. And yeah, so I'm stocked in 2 local shops.
Oh, nice.
You can just message me on Instagram. Instagram's my kind of biggest audience, which is great. I've got a Facebook page. I've got a website. So my website is themudlark.co.uk. And on Instagram, I'm Alice and the Mudlark because Alice is our golden retriever and she's my companion. She comes with me on my
And I thought your
mudlarking
name was
expeditions. So
Alice
I
when I
know
first
you
reached
did.
out to you. I was like,
You're
Alice.
not, I know. You're not the first person, I know, but Alice is getting a little bit old now, so I don't know. I know. So
Alice.
I know, but she's, I was in a magazine, Lancashire Life. They did a feature on me and she came with me on the photo shoot and
Oh.
she was a nightmare, but
Oh,
she,
okay.
she was. But it was lovely to have her be part of that. So, but yeah, she's 12 now, so she can't kind of scramble up banks anymore. But she comes now and again.
Oh. So yeah, and on Instagram, what's your
It's
username?
Alice. So Instagram is Alice and the Mudlark.
Which is how I found you. And I
Yeah.
reposted one of your works of art this morning,
Okay.
so it has all your information in there. And
Oh, thank you.
so yeah, you definitely should, listeners, check out her lovely works of art and her website.
Thank you
And
so much.
Lynn Pew, thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed talking to you.
And so did I. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
There you have it, Lynn Pew and the River Irwell. To find out more about the river and Ramsbottom and Lynn's beautiful artwork, be sure to check out our episode notes. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week.